All right. Chair now lays out House Bill 2244 and offers committee substitute. If the interjection, chair hears none. Chair recognizes Representative Gonzalez to explain her bill.
Thank you, Chairman and committee members. I'm here to lay out House Bill 2244. Frequently this asks, well, what about the students? How will this bill affect our students? We want to be a very student-centered committee, and I really appreciate that in our leadership. And this bill is exactly about students. House Bill 2244 is a New Voices Act. It's a great chance to expand learning opportunities for passionate and dedicated student journalists writing for their school publications. Limiting student learning opportunities is detrimental to their academic journeys. Furthermore, punishing students for their speech teaches them that censorship is often arbitrary and without limits is acceptable. In a society dependent on journalists and the public helping mold democracy, it is necessary to encourage the confidence of our students. Student-free press laws have passed in 14 states, including Arkansas, Kansas, and Nevada. The New Voices Act has been endorsed by the American Bar Association, the Journalism Education Association, the Society of Professional Journalists, and the National Council of Teachers of English and more. Chairman and committees, I thank you for allowing me, committee members, I thank you for allowing me to lay out committee sub HB 2244 and I reserve the right to close. Did we lay out the committee sub?
I did.
Okay.
Questions? I'm just kind of confused here. Why do you need this?
We have some wonderful people who came to testify.
No. I'm asking you. I'm serious. I mean, I'm not trying to be smart aleck. We have the First Amendment in this country. Why do you think you need to have a bill that says what we're already allowed to do?
There are some questions around where students can be censored or not censored, and I think this just creates some clarity because there has been problems in the past, and my office is happy to provide some articles that talk about some of the problems with this. But basically, the publication is a school's publication, right? And so while the journalist can write whatever they want, the school or the district can say we don't want that, and then there's a conflict, right? And so this is about student journalists having the same rights, First Amendment rights, as every other journalist would have. Like, yes. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? All right, you have some witnesses. Lee Waters. That's my boy Bill. How many witnesses do we have?
Hello, Chairman and Committee. I have some presence for journalists in the back, and there's also testimony from everyone here, so I won't read right from it, but kind of like interspersed in there. Thank you. You can focus there. Hi, I'm Leah Waters, and I'm a journalism advisor, and I teach journalism at Frisco High School. I also serve as the state director for the Texas Association of Journalism Educators, and I'm here today with a room full of about 40 high school journalists, their advisors, supporters, First Amendment advocates, to talk about the things that we love, which is we love kids and we love journalism. We love the powerful ways in which stories can transform the world and can crystallize facts in ways that sometimes a very politicized world doesn't allow us to do, and we like to teach that in our schools. So in the high school, kids don't get the opportunity to tell those stories if an administrator or a school district thinks that some of the stories that they're covering are too politicized or too complicated, and so they will tell them you can't cover it. At my school last year, we weren't allowed to cover. We were prevented from covering the school walkout, in which we protested to the Student Press Law Center and came back and said, in fact, we can cover this. And so as a result of that, that made me realize that the Hazelwood ruling, which some of the other people who are testifying are going to talk about, is the real enemy here. And this bill would basically restore press rights to students, to my kids, so that they can be afforded the same rights that any kid who comes into a high school can have. They can have the First Amendment rights, but high school journalists don't have their rights to the press in the fullest extent. I'm happy to answer any other questions you might have, although there are people who are also testifying who can probably clarify some of the questions I think you had based on why this bill is necessary.
Mr. Dutton has a question.
I have a question.
Yes.
Are there other rights that are restricted in terms of students at schools?
I can't say for certain what those might be because I live and breathe journalism. I know that I've seen firsthand my kids' rights to report responsibly stories that a journalist with working for the Dallas Morning News can report. So I can testify as to that personally.
But the other constitutional rights, you're not aware of whether they're restricted or not?
Not to the extent that that this is, because if you some of the First Amendment advocates back here can probably clarify this more fully. This has to do with students' protected speech, being able to publish that in school-sponsored publication. Right.
I understand that. I just wondered whether or not you were aware of any other restrictions on the constitutional rights of students in a school setting.
Not to the level that the school's rights to
I'm not
publish.
Sure I understand what you mean when you say not this level.
So, for example, if a student wanted to express their political beliefs in an art piece, right, and to be able to display that, they could do that, right? But if a student wanted to print that same art piece in a school publication and there was an administrator or a school board member or a parent and they thought it might be offensive or they might think it's too controversial, too edgy, the administrator could pull that, even though Hazelwood says they have to have a legitimate educational reason for pulling that. Some schools won't do it because they're afraid for their jobs. The teachers are terrified of getting fired, so they won't push it. They won't report responsibly. They won't report at all. They're not able to teach their kids real, effective, responsible journalism because they're terrified that what that might mean, what's at stake. I don't know if I answered your question, but you can.
No, that's all right.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Okay.
I think there's probably some smarter people back here who can definitely do that. But any other questions that you have for me?
No, I don't think so. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bethany Bissell, testifying for the bill.
Chair Huberty and members of the committee, my name is Bazell from Travis County, and I'm testifying in support of HB 2244. I've been involved in school-sponsored media in some respect for the last 6 years and within Austin ISD, 4 different schools, 6 different principals. I've never experienced prior viewer censorship in any respect, and I think there are a lot of misconceptions about what occurs within student media in those cases. At my current high school, we've written about cyberbullying, sexting, and student drug usage with only the guidance of our advisor. These stories have won national and statewide awards. Even more importantly, they've started conversations within our school's community about how to better ourselves. The reality is that the absence of administrative involvement in student journalism empowers us to take on the responsibilities that we can expect from professional media organizations. Over the past year, my school experienced a leadership change in which our principal, who was previously very supportive of student media, moved to a different school, and we were very anxious about that transition and what would occur for our campus. But because really there's a lack of consistency in that whoever's the principal at the time, the status of the student media organization is really subject to the whims of whatever their values are and how they feel their school should be represented and how journalism should look within those communities. And it's really just up in the air for whoever is principal at the time. And that kind of inconsistency is really what I think, for me at least, is at the root of this problem. Hazelwood kind of blurring those lines and creating that.
Mr. Dutton has a question.
Thank you for being here. Thank you for your testimony, too. Can you think of any story that you wanted to write that got censored?
So that's the thing, is that I am here today mostly as a model because my school, I'm very fortunate and very lucky to be in a school district where my principals have never censored our paper, and we've gotten the privilege to write about. It's been considered a privilege for us because it should be a right, but to report on controversial subjects such as sexting and such as cyberbullying and immigration within our community. Stories that within another school district could be censored and would be censored and have been censored.
But you yourself haven't then?
No,
Okay.
and
No,
that's really
thanks.
All right, any other questions? All right, thank you for being here. Lisa Silvera, testifying for the bill. Lisa? Sorry if I screwed that up there, Lisa.
Hi, my name is Lisa Silvera, and I'm the Senior Editor-in-Chief of the award-winning National Sample Odyssey Yearbook at Seven Lakes High School in Katy, Texas. This year, we were faced with a brand new principal who was eager to work with us at the beginning. However, as we began our print and production cycle, we were often turned away and rejected. In response to a feature over Pride Club in the yearbook, our principal stated that it was too much of a sensitive topic, and she did not approve of certain students that were featured on the page. In the first issue of the newspaper, we published a cover with a staged photo silhouette using dry ice depicting a student vaping. This related to an anti-vaping story that addressed a recent epidemic present among students at our school. Though the cover was included in our proof book for prior review, after the issue was published and distributed to the student body, our principal questioned our advisor and the staff member who was in the photo, claiming the cover was never approved. Another disagreement was a feature on a student whose biggest struggle was being gay in high school, in a hostile environment. The takeaway on the story was to just be yourself. The story was rejected by the principal in an email stating, "When is it ever important to talk about your sexuality?" We felt these stories were crucial to the student body as it not only informed students, but gave us a different perspective. When it comes to censorship, I know the administrators have good intentions. They are worried about phone calls from angry parents, the reflection of the school in the community, and the students' opinions. But high school is meant to be a learning environment, meaning we will be faced with real topics we sometimes never want to face. What truly matters is how we deal with them. We want to cover these topics not as an act of defiance for our community, but as journalists who want to keep people involved. Our administration does not take us seriously, and failure to schedule meetings to speak with us in person led to miscommunications. Our principal's lack of sensitivity to the situation, as well as her disrespect toward our advisors, our staff members, and our editors, caused the future of our journalism department to be at risk. Next year, my advisor is losing her job, and we don't know if we will be able to publish a newspaper or yearbook. Student journalism is being sacrificed for the sake of power and security in an environment where creativity and truth should be prospering. But I have learned my school is not the only place this is happening. Even though I only recently got involved with New Voices, I support Bill 2244 and the legislation's efforts to prevent retaliation against advisors like mine and protect student journalists. And this is not only relevant to my current situation, but it actually has the power to reverse its outcome. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Do you have any questions?
No, ma'am.
Thank you.
Oh, Representative Burnell.
Thank you, Chair. I'm a former newspaper yearbook guy myself.
I didn't say it. I just want y'all to know. I held back on it, buddy.
Do we want to know who you were in high school?
I didn't say it. I didn't have nothing to do with it.
Lots of Miami Vice in your background.
Mary said that. Yeah. Why are you picking on me?
Oh,
I didn't say anything.
You're the. All right. So back to the issue at hand. So I want to know, one, what happened to those original stories? The stories, the Pride story, the vaping story. What happened to the stories? I'd like to know what happened to the students who wrote them and proposed them. And you were sort of vague and sort of explicit about what happened to.
I was trying to stay in that time limit.
I know, but sort of explicit and sort of vague
Sure.
about what happened to the advisor or the sponsor. What I imagine is that they tried to stick up for the students or advocate for the students. Could you just take the time and fill in those blanks?
So a lot of our stories that were rejected or the ones that were published were watered down a lot. So we couldn't really say as much as we wanted to, and it was just presenting the facts. But other ones were completely rejected. One I didn't mention was the pink tax. I'm not sure if y'all are aware of it, but it's how women's hygiene products are more expensive than men's hygiene products, and just the comparison of that, and that was completely rejected. But the stories like these, we had a few of them that were published after we had to go through a lot to get parent approval, and even though the kids were over 18, we still had to go through like a big process and production of getting it done, and it was just the fact of the matter that she was questioning us so much and not trusting us to actually print our stories.
And then what happened to your sponsor, your advisor, your teacher?
So our advisor, I'm sorry. So a lot happened this year, obviously, with our censorship policies, and we had a new principal, so she just they didn't get off on the right start. And
I think she's trying to be delicate. Let's not.
Yeah,
let's not
I got
go
it.
there.
I'm
Okay.
not sure how much I'm supposed
I
to.
Yeah,
think
no, I get it.
I think you've said it.
But yeah, you've told us enough. And just out of curiosity, how is the paper? It's a newspaper.
Yes.
How is it distributed? Is it? Do you pay for it? Does every student get it? Is it put in their locker?
It's available to every student. They pass it out during lunches, so any student has the availability to get it. And
Okay.
then we also have an online site that stories are published on as
Okay.
well. Daily.
Thank you, Chair.
All right. Thank you for being
Thank you
here.
so much for your time.
Stephen Listopad, testifying for the bill.
Thank you, Chairman Uberty and Representative Gonzalez for sponsoring this important legislation. My name is Steve Listopad. I'm a journalism faculty and student media advisor at Henderson State University in Arkansas. I won't read through my testimony directly, but I wanted to point out that there are several key items in here that are common concerns across the country, and I've bulleted them out and addressed them. I am originally from North Dakota, where I taught journalism and advised journalism at the collegiate level. And in 2013, my students at the University of Jamestown wrote what became the New Voices Bill of North Dakota, which since then 7 states have passed, and this Texas bill is modeled off of that North Dakota bill. So I was involved in the original process. There were bills, of course, like this since 1988, since the Hazelwood decision. One of the concerns that you asked was, why is this necessary? This is necessary because of the 1988 Hazelwood decision, which segregated student press speech. Because student press, the student journalists, do almost all of their work inside the curriculum. The Supreme Court decided that curricular speech, speech that takes place in the curriculum, can be censored at will by teachers and administrators. That deviates from the Tinker standard. This bill is meant to bring student press rights back to the level of the right to wear a T-shirt, the right to have a poster in your locker, that same level. And that doesn't exist right now in Texas. It only exists in the 14 states that have these laws. Thank you. I'll answer any questions.
Question? No. Thank you. Appreciate you coming. Margie Rapper? All right. Texas Association of Journalism Educators testifying for the bill.
Good afternoon. Thank you. Thank you for this hearing. Thank you to Representative Gonzalez. My name is Margie Motasham Raper. I'm a 17-year veteran journalism educator in the state of Texas. I currently teach at Highland Park High School in Dallas, but I'm here on behalf of the Texas Association of Journalism Educators. I serve as the board president, and I'm honored to be able to represent over 300 Texas journalism teachers. And what I want to talk to you about is, in my experience with censorship, it has been very minor in comparison to some of the student stories you've heard or the teacher stories you've heard, but I think mine is thankfully due to communication and relationships. And what we do in our journalism programs, in a strong journalism program, we teach students to ask fundamental questions, to develop through research, interviewing, and networking. And through this intellectual inquiry, they're able to demonstrate leadership, commitment, ambition in their public service. And that's the key here. Student journalists are partners and allies in our schools. These students care. These students are invested. They are conversation starters. While we censor their curiosity, censor their research, censor their voices, do we stop and ask ourselves as administrators and teachers, are we doing it because of a pedagogical concern? Are we doing it because of community standards? Are we doing it out of fear? Most of the time we find it's fear of negative feedback, fear of backlash, fear of having our authority questioned. Instead of fear, a servant leader should welcome these voices. And within these voices, we're going to find that quantitative and qualitative research we want. We're also going to find insight that we didn't have, but we need. I'm learning through my role as TAJ president to be a servant leader. It's a hard path to follow, to be a transparent and open leader, but it's the right path because that's what our constituents and those are for the people we represent. These administrators carry a heavy burden, and sometimes it's a difficult decision. It's hard. It's adding one more thing to them to build relationships and work with these students, but they need this law. They need an exact wording. They need clear understanding so that they understand what they can do and how they can follow it. So I hope that you can consider this bill, consider its worth, and thank you for your time. Do you have any questions?
You, Mr. Button.
All right, thank you. You're a journalist.
Yes, sir.
You write for a newspaper?
Well, before I started my teaching career, I was a broadcast reporter and videographer and producer. I worked at CBS affiliates in Bryan College Station, Sherman, Wichita Falls.
And you had to have your analysis approved by who?
Well, I never had to have anything approved. We would have story pitch meetings, and through story pitch meetings, one of the things you're taught in journalism education is news validity. And so you would actually have to vet out your story, vet out your sources. I mean, make sure it has strength, that it's going to reach an audience. And it's one of the common questions we ask is like, so what? Like, why do we need to know this? Why is this important? And so if I could prove that, and that's what we teach our journalism students to do, if I could prove that, my stories were never questioned.
So the person asking you the question had the right to tell you what to do with it?
I'm sorry, say that one more time.
Publish it. The person asking you those questions had the right to tell you no.
Do they know because they needed news content on the...
Did you what?
No, not most of the time they didn't because they needed the news content. Did they...
Well, I didn't say they did. I said they had the right to, though.
No.
They didn't have the right to?
No, because we have, the First Amendment.
Well, I used to own a television station.
Yes.
And as the owner of the station.
Now, could you influence editorial control of the news content y'all put on?
I could stop it.
You could stop it.
That's right.
Well, I guess from my experience, I never experienced that. Now, I was coached and worked to improve the story, but I was never told no. I would be told to rework it.
Yes, sir. I think we're trying to figure out what the standards are, what the
So the Supreme Court standard.
right. So there was just make sure I understand this right. So first, I think that on the television piece, it's because they're privately owned versus
Right.
Public schools are public. They're part of the public space in the First Amendment for the most part with some restrictions. And so before Hazelwood, I think we had Tinker.
Yes.
Right. And so so could you talk about what the standard was before Hazelwood and what the guidelines were then? Because it wasn't exactly a free for all, but there were some guardrails. So if we pass Representative Gonzalez's bill, we'd go back to that standard.
Yes, that is correct.
Outline what that looks like.
Okay, so if you can see some of the students are wearing the black armbands, that is a callback to the Tinker standard that was established in the 60s. And it actually started because of the Vietnam War and students simply wanting to protest the Vietnam War. And so the Tinker standard was established when Mary Beth Tinker, her brother, and their next door neighbor simply wanted to wear a black armband to school. The principal got word of this and essentially stopped them at the door and said, no, you're suspended. Thankfully, their parents battled with them, and it made it all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Tinker Standard was established. And one of the famous quotes from the Tinker Standard is, students and teachers do not abandon their rights at the schoolhouse gate. That's the 60s. We all know the 60s are not the 80s.
But they outlined just right because
but it
they
basically
outlined
is
what the standard was. Isn't it something like the significant disruption of?
Well, that came about because of Hazelwood and because of Bethel Frazier.
Okay.
So there's two court cases that happened in the 80s.
So tell me what the standard is.
The standard is there has to be a legitimate pedagogical concern to censor a story.
Thank you.
And if you find from censorship, none of these are specific pedagogical concerns. And I know SPLC, and they can testify to the fact that there has been no libel, no school has been sued because of something a student published. Any other questions?
So that standard is after Hazelwood.
The current standard that the state of Texas operates on is Hazelwood. What happened in the 60s with the Tinker standard, we operated on that for nearly 20
But
years.
the standard you just described, that it, I can't repeat
The pedagogical.
The pedagogical concern came about because of Hazelwood.
Okay.
And that was when the Supreme Court had the hearing, they said the only way you could censor if there was a specific pedagogical concern. And so what that establishes states and schools having to define what is a pedagogical concern, and that's the vagueness in the language. What we need is something clear, concise. We don't need to leave this up to interpretation. I had an administrator who would say to me, your only job is to keep me out of the news.
So I think what people are asking, just to be clear, people are asking is if this bill passes, tell us what the standard would be.
The
What's
standard will
environment?
return us to the Tinker standard, that students and teachers do not abandon their rights at the schoolhouse gates, that we maintain the right to student press rights that were taken away with Hazelwood.
Okay. Still not sure I understand exactly what the standard under Tinker was. I get, you know,
Yes.
I
Well, that's the thing.
I get you do not abandon your rights at the schoolhouse
Well,
gate, but
that's where it became iffy. Hazelwood established the idea of not only prior review is a conversation. Prior restraint is censorship.
Right.
And Hazelwood introduced prior restraint to the state of Texas. And so principals and administrators and teachers who have not an understanding of prior review but instead go prior restraint and completely censor a story, that's the standard we need to clarify, because right now it's open to interpretation. And
Okay.
we need this bill's clear language to say this is how we should be operating. Just like you said, like, why don't we, like, everybody has their constitutional rights. Well, we don't in Texas.
Representative Gonzalez, you're gonna.
I want to give an example of a story that we heard when we were doing kind of research on this. So in McAllen, for example, there was a student newspaper that wanted to report on asbestos in the gym. They were there before the story was even published. We're told they could not publish that story. So it's prior to even getting there, they are told they can't do that. And so I think that's what we're trying to talk about and unpack here. Is when the principal and or administration can say you can't do that story and not really give even a reason. It's like no, and that's student censorship. Yes.
Got it. All right. Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Nia Madria, student journalist, testifying for the bill.
Hi, Chair Huberty and members of the committee. My name is Neha Madeira. I'm a senior and I'm editor-in-chief of Prosper High's online newspaper, Eagle Nation Online. I'm testifying in support of this bill because last year my staff was censored, prior viewed, prior restrained, editorials were banned, and my former journalism advisor was fired. We were a new publication and we also had a new principal, so we didn't know much about student press rights at the time, and we wrote most stories to keep all the students in our school body informed, but in October, our principal started censoring our stories. A senior movie day cancellation, a book being removed from our curriculum because it had gay undertones, and solutions to our school's failure of a national walkout day were all topics censored for not being positive or uplifting to the school. After each story was removed, something was taken from us. First, administrators started declining interviews. Then, our principal started practicing prior review and informed our advisors she'd be non-renewed the following year. After our last story was censored, he banned editorials. At this point, I had already gotten about 6 weeks of legal advice from the Student Press Law Center on behalf of my staff and set up numerous unsuccessful meetings with our principal. So another staff member and I spoke out at the Student Press Law Center on May 23rd of 2018. Our story received an outpour of support nationwide. More than 20 media outlets, including the New York Times and the Women's Media Center, covered our story. So compelling was our fight against censorship that it became the topic of our TED Talk we gave 6 months later and the inspiration for a New Voices editorial I published on CNN 1 week ago. We also use its national platform to spearhead the New Voices movement in Texas as much as possible. I know our staff can no longer be silenced, but the protections New Voices provides for us would ensure that things like this never happen again. At the same time, these rights would not make our publications a Pandora's box of what can be said. This free press law has been passed in 14 other states, and not a single one has resulted in anyone suing a school alleging any wrong. This legislation is also not students versus administrators. It actually protects administrators from the pressure they face from community members to censor. After all, education is all about teaching students how to use critical thinking skills, and journalism is about putting these skills into practice. When student media publications have new voices to support them in seeking and reporting the truth, they use the very skills that our education system is built on. Thank you. I'm happy to take any questions.
Good job. Thank you. Where do you go to school now?
I still go to Prosper High School.
Oh, you do? Oh, okay. Where are you in college? Where are you going to college?
UT.
You going to go to UT? There you go. All right. Wesley Lewis, testifying for the bill. Student Press Law Center.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Wesley Lewis. I'm from the law firm of Haynes & Boone here in Austin on behalf of the Student Press Law Center. I'm here to offer our strong support for HB 2244. It provides more robust First Amendment protection, like we've heard, particularly as it pertains to student journalism. To answer some questions that were previously posed, unfortunately, constitutional protections that are currently afforded to students are imbalanced and inadequate to allow journalism programs to fully accomplish their goals of teaching students to promote civic engagement and to promote accountability and shed light on issues that are affecting schools. As we've alluded to previously, the Supreme Court has held that students don't lose their constitutional rights at the schoolhouse gates. However, unfortunately, this Hazelwood decision that y'all have heard about earlier severely limits those in the context of student journalism. So this impedes educators' abilities to effectively administer journalism programs. And so in response, 14 states have passed these new voices laws, legislation aimed at ensuring that student journalists have their voice heard in these programs. And it corrects a lack of parity between school speech and school speech in the student journalism context. So this bill would not create a situation where speech that falls outside the protections of the First Amendment are allowed. It does not allow for defamation or libel or unlawful speech. It does not, any message that a school can lawfully regulate on a t-shirt can still be regulated under HB 2244. This just extends the protection of Tinker to the context of school journalism classrooms. And I know that there were some questions about the constitutional concerns. I'm happy to answer those as an attorney, but I see I'm out of time. So
Thank you. Questions, everybody? All right, thank you. Is there anybody else wish to testify for or against House Bill 2244? Seeing none, public testimony is closed. I'm calling Representative Gonzalez. Actually, I need to withdraw the committee substitute for the House Bill 2244. Now recognize Representative Gonzalez to close on that bill.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you to all the students who are here. Your hard work is truly inspiring. They bought me this bill. They've been advocating for it and working really hard, educating me on what they really need. And, you know, we have these endorsements that this committee has passed a few years ago because we want young people to have their experiences in high school to prepare them for the real world outside of high school. And in the same ways that we have the endorsements so they can learn these pipelines, we should want them to have a very real experience of journalism because that's what we're asking them to do. I think Representative Tallarico has a question, Chairman. But
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Not a question. Just wanted to say I thought the student testimony was the most impressive I've seen this whole session. So thank you.
thank you, and with that, I close.
This time, House Bill 2244 will be left pending.